Okay, let's see.
Okay, yeah, some people want to come on up, so I'll let them come on up.
Sure.
Madam Chair. So it's an honor to be doing my very first bill hearing before the Economic Matters Committee. Chair Valderrama, distinguished members of the committee. I knew Delegate Fisher as a staffer, so it's nice to know him as a colleague now. And when I worked for the Ways and Means Committee. So this bill would allow municipalities to purchase and maintain their own streetlights, thus accelerating investment in energy-efficient street lighting. And the reason why I'm bringing this bill, Chair Valderrama, is that only a small number of utility-owned streetlights in the state have been upgraded. For example, in our community, Madam Chair, only 4% of the 65,000 utilities streetlights owned in Prince George's, in the PEPCO service territory in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, have been converted to energy-efficient LED streetlights. Now, you read the opposition testimony and you think that this is the worst bill in the world, but the fact is, this bill is not unprecedented, but rather modeled after successes in other states, such as California, New York, the swing state of Pennsylvania, and right here in the District of Columbia. And this is mentioned in the fiscal note, but I think it's worth repeating because I put more credibility in the MEA than in the opponents of this legislation when they say they found that the conversion of utility-owned streetlights to municipal ownership is best practice and underscored the need for strong legislation. And I just also want to talk about how the power company's opposition, Mr. Vice Chair, is unfortunate, but it is entirely predictable because the status quo works for them, but not our municipalities. PEPCO says they are close to reaching an agreement on this issue with the PSC and advocates, but this issue has been around for many years, and the success of those negotiations remains to be seen. The proof will be in the pudding. And together, we can achieve greater energy efficiency and empower our municipalities with greater autonomy. And I think one of the problems in the past years for this legislation is that people think it'll only benefit Montgomery and Prince George's County, but it's important to note that Maryland has 157 incorporated municipalities, including in places like Hartford County and Garrett County, far away from Montgomery and Prince George's County. And I would just say that this bill is a money saver because LED lights, the average lifespan of an LED light is often rated up to 50,000 hours. This is about 50 times longer than the traditional light bulb. And if you use it for 8 hours a day, it's going to last 11 years longer than, it's going to last about 11 years longer than previously. And if you use it for 12 hours a day, it's going to last, if you're going to use it, if you use it for 8 hours a day, it's 17 years longer, and 12 hours a day, it's 11 years longer. So this is a common sense bill. I want to thank Delegate Biafo for co-sponsoring the legislation with me, and let's empower our municipalities and move our environment forward with this comprehensive legislation that has already passed in numerous states. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair. Al go? Yeah, Al.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. It's good to see you all. I live in the PEPCO territory, and here's why they oppose this enabling legislation. PEPCO's failing to comply with the 2012 settlement agreement to repair 90% of the 50,000 lights they own within 5 business days. Their record keeping is so poor that the invoices they send to counties and municipalities are months and years out of date. The website where the public can report streetlight problems contains errors and omissions. And instead of modern LED lights, we're stuck with 1970s lights. So giving a little more time to the PSC is not the solution. In 2020, PEPCO promised this committee they would file an LED upgrade plan, but they didn't talk to their customers, and that plan was so flawed that the PSC rejected it. Last year, PEPCO said it planned to refile the LED plan. That didn't happen. They did file in April clarifications to their tariff. Dozens of us signed a letter in response, and the PSC has directed the parties to meet. Those discussions are ongoing, but they've been a bit one-sided. The fiscal note references 2000 OAG opinion stating that the PSC does not have the authority to resolve disputes over the value of lights. The only way to resolve such disputes is through condemnation authority, which municipalities have always had. PEPCO is an outlier because they refuse to sell their lights unless the price includes lost income. That's not how it's worked anywhere else. Setting the value as the original cost of the lights minus depreciation is the industry standard in DC and all the other states. Please ask PEPCO why they want to give Maryland a worse deal than DC got. So in closing, utilities have nothing to fear as long as they're providing great service, great price, prompt repairs, upgrade paths. Their customers will be happy and will stay. Works well in other states. I respectfully ask for a favorable report.
Thank you, and I apologize. I was late getting in here as I was briefing a bill in a different committee, but I do want to welcome back our former colleague, Delegate Alcard, to the committee.
Yeah, good to see you.
All right, whoever's next, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in favor of House Bill 459. My name is Mark Carter, and I'm a Vice President with Realterm Energy. We have U.S. headquarters on West Street here in Annapolis, and our Canadian offices are located in Montreal, Canada. Our firm over the last 10 years have worked with 350 municipal and local government entities to convert their lights over to LEDs. We've worked in 15 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces, and we've converted almost 300,000 LED lights. The results in that, the savings for our municipal customers are approximately 110 million kilowatt hours per year, which results in a savings of $20 to $25 million for these entities. What we've generally seen over the results of these municipal buybacks are they gain 3 things. Number one would be a cost reduction. That's both from an energy reduction for the supply and the delivery cost, as well as the maintenance fees and any rental fees. Also from a quality standpoint, they can now take ownership of repairs and get them done much faster. And they also have control over the type of lights they install, whether it's the color, temperature, the aesthetics, or the type of LED. So they can actually model that versus a one-size-fit-all approach. And the third aspect of it that's beneficial for local governments is the infrastructure. As time goes on, with smart city technologies for enhanced LTE services, public Wi-Fi, air quality sensors, the ownership is a strategic assets for municipalities to have these assets. With that, I want to thank everybody for their time and respectfully I'll yield the floor.
Mr. Vice Chair, before we go to the next witness, the butterflies got me, and I forgot to state my name for the record. So Aaron Kaufman, District 18, House Bill 459.
Hello, I'm Gary Crockett from Chevy Chase Village. I'm a board member and treasurer for the village. And I apologize for appearing before you a little bit disheveled, but I would point out that the rain falls on the just as well as on the unjust. Mm-hmm. Judging by how good looking you all are, you must be all too young to have watched Laugh-In during the late 60s and early 70s, unlike me. A recurring character on that show was Lily Tomlin's Ernestine, a telephone operator. Her catchphrase was, "We're the phone company. We don't care. We don't have to." Our interactions with PEPCO have reminded me very much of Ernestine. Municipal streetlights use 1% or 2% of PEPCO's electricity. Those who might buy their lights are probably 1% or 2% of that. So this whole issue is round-off error for PEPCO, not even round-off error. I suspect that to the PSC, we're also more irritants than anything else. The real game is the next rate case. No one wants to make a concession on streetlights that might complicate the bigger picture. Small towns have no leverage. Only the legislature can change any of the "we don't care" into "you do have to." In Chevy Chase Village, we don't even know whether we want to buy our streetlights. How could we decide that without knowing how much it would cost? Before we can even ask that question, Pepco wants us to pay about $100 per light for a survey to find out how many of their lights we have, and to find out where they are and other light characteristics. That Pepco doesn't already have that information is a business decision that they made. It may have saved them a bundle in accounting costs over the years, but it doesn't make it our problem. Imagine calling the number on a home's for sale sign and reaching the home's owners who say that they own the house, but they don't know anything about it, so you should pay for an inspection and appraisal, and then they'll talk about a price. And maybe the price won't be based on this particular house, but on an average of all the houses they own. Now, that's obviously not an accurate description of the situation. To make it accurate, you have to say that they own all of the houses that are for sale. We're asking for simple things. The price on our lights should be the depreciated cost of the actual lights, not an average of Pepco's holdings. We let Pepco use our rights of way for free, and in return, we shouldn't have to pay attachment fees. We shouldn't bear the cost of Pepco's figuring out what they own in our community. They should tell us how much our lights are worth on request. Help us, Obi-Wan Committee. You're our only hope. Please give this bill a favorable report.
Good afternoon. My name is Sue Ellen Ferguson. I'm with Council Baradell in Annapolis. I'm here on behalf of Chevy Chase Village. I also represent College Park, Kensington, and Washington Grove, all of whom support this bill, and ask for a favorable report. The conversion from outdated, expensive, and ecologically disastrous lights to LED has been glacial for the municipalities and for everyone else in our areas. Pepco does not yet have an LED conversion rate plan approved by the PSC. When the municipalities have been asked to buy their lights, and they have at various times, they've been told first, as was noted, you have to pay for a survey so we can tell you what lights are in your jurisdiction because we don't know. No one ever got past that part. As part of the tariff filing this past year, the PSC has asked the municipalities and Pepco to talk about this because Pepco did not have a proposal to give to people about how they were going to evaluate what the lights cost and the process that you would have to go through to be able to buy them. So for quite a while, we've been going through this process. One thing I will tell you from having been on the municipal side of this negotiation now for almost a year has been Pepco is not in agreement with municipalities as to what the value of these lights is. And you're deciding this and approving and with a favorable report and this bill being adopted would help the municipalities because we would know how to evaluate the price and would not have to do expensive and time-consuming things such as condemning a street light that is so out of date, it's been up there for 40 years. Please don't make us do that. Please report favorably. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Before we go to virtual, we'll go to Delegate Aaron's.
Mr. Chair, I have two questions. I go to some towns and I see beautiful streetlights. Who pays for those?
It would depend. Some municipalities have separately bought the light bulb and had it switched out to LED. College Park just did that for the bulb alone. It was $1,500.
The beautiful posts.
I'm sorry?
The beautiful posts that they're on.
No, those are different. Those are pedestrian lights, and those are usually provided by the municipality.
That's done by the municipality.
Right.
The other question I have this for anybody is, when we all I see is a price here. Everybody's talking about the price. What is the dollar difference we're looking at? Is there a number we put on this, or is it ambiguous?
There is a number that's based on the entire inventory, and it is, it doesn't matter how new or old your lights are. They have actually put a number on it now, and I believe it's, and I hopefully not incorrect, $189 for each one, but that goes along with a lot of other fees. So that's just for a street light, and I think I may be incorrect about that, actually. I don't have the number.
Last question for me. How many towns or municipalities are asking to do this now? Do you know?
There have been at least 10 or 12 that have been a part of the ongoing discussions. You have to understand, this is an expensive proposition for these municipalities to participate in these rate and tariff hearings. They have to have lawyers there. It's difficult, but at least 10 or 12 have been weighing in.
Okay, maybe some other
Mr.
questions
Vice Chair,
offline.
can I
Thank you.
answer Delegate
That's
Arndt's
good.
question? Or, thank you.
Thank you, though.
All right, that's fine. No, I just wanted to note that in your file, there's a letter from the Metropolitan Council of Governments supporting this legislation, and they represent a huge swath of people. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you all, I assume you've seen the letter from Jason Stanek at the PSC. I just wanted to ask you a couple questions in regards to that. First of all, he says that municipalities already have the ability to do this. The issue was always around fair market value.
Yes.
They expressed concern about the bill not allowing charging for certain items and saying then that would have to be subsidized by other customers. And then finally, he does say that they have a final meeting proposed with PEPCO on April 7th that would address these issues. So can you comment on the PSC's points in their letter?
Yes. First of all, that is a response frequently from PEPCO that if the municipalities don't pay, it will be spread out across the class.
It's not a PEPCO letter, it's a PSC.
Understood, but that's not the argument that the PEPCO has made to the PSC, that they're, at least someone is adopting there. It's a rounding error. The amount of money that's involved with this is so small, it would be not even a penny or a half a penny to anybody. It's tiny. That's number one. There is an argument over what fair market value is. PEPCO thinks they should be able to charge for the money they would make off of this light if it was still up there. That's one of the things. The municipalities respond by saying, fair market value here should be the net value of the light. It was purchased 40 years ago, 30 years ago, and it has no value now because nobody would use it and nobody will buy it. Nobody wants to buy. It's what a willing seller and buyer will do. No buyer would buy these lights because they're no longer have any utility. So it should be the net value, which is what was spent, and then how it got depreciated. These lights have been depreciated down to nothing a long time ago.
So it seems like the issue is around the value of the light. So wouldn't the bill better address the value of the light and trying to resolve this issue rather than trying to address an issue which apparently there's already a process in place for acquisition of these lights by municipalities?
The bill addresses two things. One is the value of the lights and says it should be the net book value. And then it also tries to, I think, make things more clear for everyone. And I would like, obviously, the delegate has a better grasp of this than I do in terms of why it was written the way it is.
All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Delegate Kaufman, good to see you. Thanks for presenting your bill. One question, I was remiss, today's MML Day. It's like Gold Scarf Day here in Annapolis, and I did not see any testimony on this bill from MML. Can you give us their position? Because I understand they represent, what, 200 and some municipalities throughout the state?
Yes, Mr. Minority Whip, it's good to see you again. I do know the answer to that. And they did support the bill last year, but when I asked their lobbyist that why they didn't support it this year, they said it was a perception that this bill, which is totally false and nothing could be further from the truth, would only benefit Montgomery and Prince George's counties. But as I outlined in my testimony, there are municipalities all over the state. And when I asked her why, including Middleton in your district, sir, and when I asked them why the legislative committee would support it in 2022 and take no position today, they said simply the composition of our legislative committee changes every year.
But they're not in opposition.
No, they took no position on it.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the bill. Jesse took one of my questions, but my follow-up is this enabling, so it's not requiring municipalities to do this? They can just choose to do it if they wanted to?
That's absolutely correct. This is, for example, your party believes a lot in local control and local autonomy, and that's exactly what this bill does. If they do not want to do it, they don't have to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes this panel. We'll go to the two virtual favorable. First, I have John Compton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Right. Good afternoon. Yes, and thanks for the opportunity to speak in support of this bill. I'm going to come at this a little bit different, and as you will see, the town of Washington Grove, maybe most of you know, small municipality in Montgomery County. We're on the National Register of Historic Places, and our lighting on poles owned by Pepco is included as a historic associated feature in the National Register Historic District listing. On our own initiative, the streetlights in Washington Grove have been converted to LED bulbs supplied by the town, as Ms. Ferguson suggested had happened in some communities, with the cooperation of Pepco, who owns the streetlight fixtures. The result of the conversion has been a substantial reduction in the use of electricity and a 75% reduction in the town's street lighting bill. Alarmingly, the multi-year plan filed by Pepco in October 2020 with the Public Service Commission included provisions that the town interpreted as potentially threatening to our continuation of use of historic street lighting aesthetics and to the cost savings from our proactive conversion to LED bulbs. The PSC rejected the filing, but directed Pepco to continue discussions with municipalities. Washington Grove has been an active participant in those ensuing discussions. While some progress has been achieved in defining a fair process, something that was wholly lacking previously, to date, and equitable requirements for municipal purchase or replacement of streetlights, also totally lacking, it's become clear that the resolution of important issues in the public interest is unlikely to occur without further direction from the General Assembly. In particular, guidance is required to ensure that utilities cannot condition the sale of streetlights nor the installation of new streetlights owned by municipalities with the payment of excessive and unjustified fees, unnecessary procedures, or threats to the continuation of the right to attach to the poles owned by Pepco. Experience in several New England states demonstrates that communities can benefit substantially. You heard an earlier supporter indicate that for many municipalities, including a small town such as Royalston in Massachusetts, I believe. They've also realized substantial savings from this ownership and conversion. Yet in our region, only Washington, D.C. has been able to purchase the overhead streetlights, and that was decades ago. And the question is why? So I speak for town Washington Grove and its residents and recommending favorable action on this bill. The present bill goes a long way towards removing the impediments currently preventing municipalities from achieving the goals of Section 1309, which grants directs the Pepco to make purchase of the streetlights available. Improves lighting, saves
Sir, I'm
electricity.
going to need you to start to wrap up.
Okay, I've wrapped up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll go to Andy Harney.
Thank you all for hearing this and giving us an opportunity to testify on behalf of our community, Section 3 of the Village of Chevy Chase. I'm the village manager. Our community is 1/10 of a square mile, and we are in support of HB 459. You have my written testimony before me, but in reviewing the testimony of the 3 affected electric companies, one of their primary objections is the definition in HB 459 of net book value, and I know Attorney Ferguson alluded to this in what she had to say. Unfortunately, the 2007 law was not explicit enough on the point regarding the value of these lights. The original legislation said counties and municipalities who wanted to purchase their own lights would have to pay the electric company fair market value for those lights. Now, Black's law definition and the common understanding of fair market value is a willing seller and a willing buyer agree to a price for an item. But there's no agreement on this point with Pepco. And in Section 3's case, we've been trying to buy our lights since 2009. At the time this legislation was passed, lighting in most communities was not as obsolete as it is today. In fact, I don't doubt that many who voted for the original legislation thought localities would be buying the lights they already had. But that's not the case today. Very few jurisdictions have LED lighting, the most energy efficient lighting on the market. And most street light companies don't even make the types of lighting found in many of our streets, high pressure sodium lights. In short, there are no willing buyers for outdated lights, which is why the electric companies are asking for average net book value instead of net book value as defined in this enabling legislation. Ultimately, despite the fact that county and municipal lighting represents only a tiny fraction of their overall revenue, they're worried about the loss of revenue if we purchased our own lights. For them, it's the slippery slope. They want the definition of fair market value most favorable to them. But that definition is not fair, and fair market value, after all, should be fair. We ask that you pass this thoughtful, enabling legislation to make it easier for us to achieve our goal of better and more energy efficient street lighting for our residents. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you, and that concludes the favorable panel. Next up, we'll have the unfavorable, both in person. Thank you all for coming. We have Kate Lanzarato and David Schatz. Additionally, I'll call up Lisa Smith, who is information only. Try to be a little bit more efficient. Go ahead, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Crosby, members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Katie Lanzarato, here on behalf of Pepco and Delmarva Power. With me today is Dave Schatz, who's the Director of Strategy for PHI, and he's here at my request. He's not a registered lobbyist, but can answer any questions you may have for our company. You have our written testimony, but I'll reiterate that since Pepco was last before this committee on this issue in 2022, we have been working diligently with interested municipalities on the process for the sale of street lighting equipment in a regulatory proceeding at the Public Service Commission, which previously had not occurred, and which is why we believe this matter will be resolved soon. Pepco and Delmarva Power are not opposed to the sale of street lighting equipment to municipalities. We are, however, opposed to the sales structure outlined in this legislation, as we believe it favors the purchaser at the detriment of the seller. Pepco and Delmarva Power respectfully request that the ongoing PSC proceeding outlined in the Commission's testimony on this bill be allowed to proceed to its conclusion before we consider the bill before you. All identified parties interested in this matter are participating in that proceeding, and we consider the PSC to be the appropriate entity to make a final determination on the sale of street lighting equipment based on current deliberations. As a final status conference is scheduled for April 7th, and thereafter, as the Commission's indicated in its testimony, that there will be a resolution to the unsettled issues between the parties. Therefore, we believe this bill is unnecessary at this time, and we respectfully request an unfavorable report. I'll take any questions.
Did you have testimony, here, sir, or are you just here for?
He's just here for questions.
All right, moral support. Okay. All right. Seeing no question. Oh, Delegate Charkoudian.
I just, so Tacoma Park went through this and it was a painful and long process and they finally pulled it off. And I'm just wondering since then, I think that was like 5 or more years ago. Since then, how many municipalities have you worked with and successfully reached agreement with and gotten this process completed with? Like since Tacoma Park 5 years ago, I think.
We can come back to the committee with a clarification
Like
on how many.
1, 10, 30, roughly?
I'm not sure of the exact number, but I do know we have a standard process for engaging in these negotiations, and this ongoing negotiation under the PSC's guidance is clarifying it even further with the municipalities.
But I'm just wondering, because you've been coming before the committee saying this isn't necessary. I appreciate the Public Service Commission is stepping in now. I think something is necessary because I think it's 0, but maybe it's 1. But I think there's a good deal of interest among municipalities, and I think that there have been none since Tacoma Park pulled this off, whenever that was, 5 or 6 years ago.
That was before my time at the company, so I'm not sure.
So there haven't been any recently?
Not that I am aware of.
Despite
no.
like the interest that folks have expressed in this?
Correct.
And the fact that you're saying that you are open to and interested in the process, but just don't want the fair market value in this bill.
Yeah, we disagree with the definition that's in the legislation. And I think at this point, we would like to see, I think the commission is going to make make a decision, right? And we're going to evaluate that decision, and there'll be a process to move forward.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? Oh, no, you haven't spoken yet. I'll let you speak first. Sorry.
Doug Howard.
Is this process like hidden from the municipalities? I mean, they know about it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Have any of them reached out to you?
In the current PSC proceeding
I
process?
mean, we had a line of questioning here that talked about you guys working within the process for the municipalities. If they know about it and they're interested in it, I would think that they would reach out to you and engage in that process. And I think a fair secondary question, the line of questioning that just occurred, would be how many have reached out to you to work within that process? So if you could get back to us with that information, that would be great.
Many of them were here today on the previous panel, the ones that we've been engaging in conversations with over the last 7 months.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Lisa, last question here. They mentioned April 7th. Is this going to be rectified on April 7th?
April 7th, yes, Mr. Chair, that's the final status conference. And I imagine there will be issues for the commission to resolve shortly after that, but hopefully the resolution will guide matters should there be other municipalities, other utilities as well.
Praise the Lord. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, that concludes this hearing. Next, we'll go to Delegate Queen, HB 630. Okay, we will go to Delegate Queen, House Bill 511.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to apologize to my committee. We had some confusion on the order. We were looking at what was listed on the website and not pulling up the actual agenda that was posted. So I do have some folks who may leave me if we don't get them out of here. So if you don't mind, we would like to do this bill first. Thank you. So I'm Delegate Pam Queen. I am here to talk about HB 511, Renewable Energy Portfolio Standards, Solar Energy Compliance Fees. So again, greetings, Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. So HB 511 seeks to address some stagnation with the solar renewable energy projects developed in Maryland. And we're asking that by freezing, if only temporary, the solar alternative compliance payment. Currently, Maryland is really not on track to meet our renewable energy portfolio standards, and we expect that this will become more of an issue later as we look at being more aggressive in subsequent years. The solar alternative compliance payment is the amount that electric suppliers pay per megawatts of solar electricity that they are not able to generate or purchase the rights of via solar renewable energy credits. And so in 2021, Maryland retail electric customers paid $70 million in alternative compliance fees due to the unavailability of adequate SRACs. And this resulted in a penalty to ratepayers without the benefit of a low-cost, stable cost, and clean renewable energy being produced. So one belief is because of Maryland's solar alternative compliance payment prices are much lower than our surrounding state, it lacks the incentive for solar developers to come to Maryland and expand solar development projects in Maryland. So creating and cultivating a diverse energy portfolio in Maryland will in the long run reduce costs to ratepayers, create jobs, and enable Maryland to meet its environmental goals for renewable energy. So I just want to point to one letter that we have from Maryland's Energy Administration, Director Pinsky, which states that without this bill, it is likely that solar development in the state will suffer, perhaps to a level that would make solar development unsustainable in the state. And so I do request that HB 511 will provide this much-needed incentive to ramp up solar development now in Maryland, and so I seek a favorable recommendation from the committee. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. My name is Allie Nafakis, and I'm here on behalf of SREC Trade and Expansive Company. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak in favor of House Bill 511. SREC Trade is a management and transaction platform for SRECs, which are solar renewable energy certificates. We currently manage over 76,000 clients over multiple states. We primarily participate in programs that have an SREC market. Stable SREC prices give security when building and financing solar projects. One of the main components that influences SREC prices is the SACP. That's the Solar Alternative Compliance Payment. SREC prices affect the revenue that comes from solar projects, and it brings down barriers that prevent residential and commercial owners from purchasing these assets. The current ACP in Maryland is $60, and it's set to go down to $22.50 by 2030. As SREC prices will decline, the state is going to see more ACP payments being made. Higher ACPs lead to confidence in being able to finance these projects. As we see the ACP decline, we're also going to see build rates in Maryland being affected. It's going to be harder for people to afford solar if they don't have a way to offset the costs. In other states that experience price drops, the capital investment in solar projects remains low, and it's more expensive as businesses have less certainty with their investments. We recommend holding the ACP at $60. This will make sure that more people are able to afford solar. We're going to see increased build rates, and we're going to see jobs in the economy affected by this. So SREC Trade greatly supports HB 511. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Crosby and the members of the committee. My name is Luke Smith, and on behalf of CI Renewables, I respectfully urge a favorable report on House Bill 511. This bill is important to me both as a Maryland ratepayer and an employee of a Baltimore City-based solar company. In 2021, our company moved our headquarters to Baltimore so that we could invest in Maryland's economy and grow the commercial and industrial segment of the solar industry here in the state. We've only just begun, but we've already delivered 30 megawatts of solar energy to Howard County government as part of the largest power purchasing agreement in the state. As you've already heard, the Solar Alternative Compliance Payment, the SACP, is one of the primary determinants of solar renewable energy credit pricing, SRECs. Put plainly, as you increase the SACP, you stabilize potential revenue from a solar projects, and as developers like ourselves or residential ratepayers who choose to put this on their home see stable revenue forecasts, we are driven to deliver more solar projects. Unfortunately, the diminishing SACP schedule in Maryland and the resulting lack of solar projects caused ratepayers, like Delegate Queen already pointed out, to pay over $70 million in compliance fees without the benefit of adding clean, stable cost electricity to our grid. Temporarily freezing the SACP will provide the feasibility and certainty developers need to invest the hundreds of millions of dollars we'll collectively have to deploy to hit our RPS goals, currently doubling the rate that we're delivering megawatts at today in Maryland. Incentivizing solar will continue to reduce cost for ratepayers in the long run by adding low-cost energy generation and insulating against environmental, societal, and geopolitical shocks. We appreciate your support on this bill, and thank you, Delegate Queen, for her leadership.
Good afternoon, members. Oh, sorry. That's okay. Good afternoon, Chair Crosby, members of the committee. My name is Jen Brock with High Street Strategies. We represent CI Renewables. We're here today in support of HB 511 with sponsor. We have some amendments to, just to clarify, it doesn't impact existing contracts. Kristen Harberson also apologizes. She had to leave to go to a hearing. So Maryland League of Conservation Voters is also supportive and asks you to reference their written testimony. And we also thank MEA for their support that Delegate Queen mentioned. Maryland is not on track to meet our solar goals of our renewable portfolio standard. by freezing this diminishing solar alternative, I just want to point that out, it's an alternative payment, we will maintain the incentives and avoid customers paying millions of dollars in alternative compliance fees, right? You're either going to pay this fee or you buy SRECs, and this bill is to ensure there will be more SRECs on the market to be able to be purchased. I also want to point out there's a chart that was submitted with Luke's testimony that compares Maryland's alternative compliance payments to surrounding states. Washington, D.C.'s are in the $500 to $300 range. New Jersey is in the $300 to $150 range. Without passing this bill, Maryland's payment level, which drives the SREC prices, will essentially go off a cliff after 2024. So we're urging temporarily freezing those prices to provide the feasibility and the stability for developers to incentivize actual solar development. And it also signals to companies like CI Renewables that move their headquarters to Maryland to stay here and invest in more solar development here. I also just want to comment that this bill you might hear won't have an impact. And you just heard from various segments of the industry that it will. So we urge your support of SB 511. Thank you.
Quickly, I just want to make sure I understand. I don't read this as being temporary. It looks like it's a permanent change, right? Because it goes all the way out 2030 plus, right? Is that correct?
It's currently written as a permanent change. So I was just saying in my testimony, if we thought that it just to do it temporary would be worth doing as well.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Harrison.
Thank you. I've gotten a little confused because you're saying that you want this, you want the freeze on it. But I was reading in some other testimony that is, I guess, on the other side. They also want a freeze. So I think I've gotten confused as to what the problem could possibly be.
Do you want me? I can address that, Delegate. I think you might be referencing testimony that had an alternative solution. So this bill, as drafted, freezes the payment level at $60. And as we just mentioned to the chair, we're open to it being a more temporary freeze of the alternative compliance payments, which are in statute right now set to decline a little bit each year. There was, I think, opposition testimony that proposed freezing the renewable portfolio standard goals, which are for solar to, you all passed legislation several years ago to get Maryland at 50% renewable, and I think it's 50% by 2030 and 14% of that from solar. And I read that testimony as to say, instead of changing the alternative compliance fees, which again are an alternative to buying the renewable energy credits, they were suggesting you freeze the goals of the renewable portfolio standard, because there was some concern about the PJM queue, but there are many projects like CI Renewables that don't even go through the PJM process.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this bill kind of really confuses me, because one of my pet peeves is that you're asking us to hold a price on a premium because of a policy we can't meet. We set goals that we cannot achieve. So by setting those goals that we have not been able to achieve, you want to continually say we need more money to achieve what we said we would achieve by the goals that we set that were astronomically high that Maryland cannot possibly meet. So I'm kind of confused on, why don't we just sit back and readjust the policies that this body's come up with to put this pressure on the ratepayers to accelerate these costs? Why don't we come up with a plan that's reasonable to allow solar to develop at a normal pace, if you will, to meet what we can actually do, as opposed to falsely saying we are heroes somehow because we go to Pennsylvania and everywhere else on the PJM to buy clean energy, which none of those people have in excess to sell it. My question would be, why don't we just readdress the real issue here instead of using this, saying that if we don't do this, it'll cost ratepayers more? If we would slow this process down, it would not be costing the ratepayers the penalties that we have inflicted upon ourselves. Thank you.
So you're talking about the two different holding pieces that they were talking about. I think that Delegate Harrison raised. So we're not advocating that we need to change the goals for RPS because the solar projects, you had a long question.
Yes, I did.
The solar projects that we are referring to are ones that we could develop, right? We believe we have the ability to develop. These are things that are going to be on rooftops. These are things that we can develop. This is that less than 5 megawatt type of projects, right? We can develop this. But what the solar alternative compliance does, it says that if you can't meet it, if you don't want to pay for it, or if it's too expensive to pay for, we kind of have this other something that's supposed to deter you from wanting to pay that and to try to do solar. We believe we can, for these projects, develop these smaller projects. These are not ones that are being held up because of we don't have the infrastructure to do it. We have the ability to do it. We just want to make sure, and we have a company that's here, at least one company we know that is here in Maryland who wants to do these smaller projects. We want them to be incentivized to do these projects and not pay this alternative fee. And so that's the thought of, if we even do it temporary, for a couple of years, to see how that progresses us to get to the RPS goals. So that's what we're trying to look at. And I think that's why you have the director of MEA saying this makes sense.
Well, that's fine that he's saying. I'm saying it doesn't, and I get your
I
point.
know, but I guess
get your point, but-
who are we considered the experts on this? MEA or me?
Well, I'll
Me and
argue
you.
that point. We've given this, and we've done it one way for years. This has been our goal, is to achieve renewable energy. We're not doing it now. We're sitting back giving another reason why we need to put more money in to carve out more of a product or a system or service that we have not proven we can provide on a timely basis. And by setting those goals, this is going to get too long, I'm sorry. But by setting those goals, we are putting it all over the ratepayer, and then we're turning it around on the ratepayer here today to say, if you don't do this, your rates are going to go up. And that's not a genuine conversation to have when you're talking about the ratepayers and making your business better, by the way, sir.
Is there a question?
I would just respond to her.
Okay.
Seriously. Isn't that so?
Yeah,
How's that?
okay. All right, Delegate
No.
Weibel.
Thank you.
I think I understand, the penalties go to fund the solar construction of solar panels and all that, but I'm trying to make sure I understand the ACP. So that, the ACP, is the utility allowed recovery in rates for that payment?
They are.
It is. So,
It's directly passed through to ratepayers.
so none of it goes to the stockholder, none of it's below the line. It's all paid for by the ratepayer.
Into the fund, I think it's SEIF here in Maryland, to then be deployed for low-income solar projects.
All right. So wouldn't the utility rates decline by the $70 million a year if we didn't have this payment? I understand it doesn't meet the goals, but wouldn't that be the net impact of, if this payment went away, wouldn't utility rates decline by $70 million a year?
We're currently delivering solar in the state at some rate, granted not meeting the RPS goals, but with a diminishing SACP, we can assure you that even companies like ourselves in the commercial and industrial segment would not be able to build projects at a financeable level here in Maryland. So even with a decreasing SACP, decreasing directly the amount of solar that's delivered in the state is still going to result in a ratepayer penalty.
In what regard?
So the RPS goal is it continues to step up.
Okay.
If we continue to deliver less and less solar, regardless of a diminishing SACP fee, there's still going to be a ratepayer impact.
It's going to be some
If you do- if
Wouldn't
this-
that argument be the case only if solar were a cheaper form of generation than our traditional fossil fuels or nuclear?
If solar today was?
Yeah, so
Yes.
in order for electric rates to decline, wouldn't that source of generation have to be lower than whatever source of generation is today?
Correct. And the SACP schedule in Maryland, as it was initially contemplated, was supposed to follow the marginal efficiency of cost savings in solar on a per kilowatt hour basis. So if you look back over the last decade in solar energy costs on a per watt basis, you'll see a pretty substantial decline. We're now in a part of the curve, and COVID certainly hasn't helped us from a global supply chain business either, where there is a diminishing increase in efficiency in the technology that lowers our cost per megawatt. So I think the contemplation behind the bill here is that the SACP is not actually tagged to the market economics, and where if it's still costing us as much, if not more, arguably, based on some labor considerations at the federal level that have come through in the Inflation Reduction Act, Maryland doesn't actually provide at its current SACP enough of an incentive for solar energy companies like ourselves to be investing here. As Delegate Queen pointed out, we're a middle market segment on commercial and industrial, and residential falls into the same category, community solar as well, where we don't have the same restrictions from the PJMQ, which you might see in some of the unfavorable positions, as I'm learning in your packet, I think. So all to say, we see that there's a means by which we can be delivering the right amount of solar at the right level to close the gap to the RPS so that ratepayers aren't paying a fee.
Okay, and so what is the average cost per kilowatt hour for generation for solar? Do we know? in the
Yes,
state?
in Maryland, ground mounts can be delivered on the commercial and industrial scale side. I'll speak directly. Residential and community solar and utilities is the different segments all have a little bit of a different mix, but from a commercial and industrial perspective, you can deliver ground watts as low as about $1.20 a watt. Carports are at the upper end as far as around $3 a watt here. So this SACP schedule is a mechanism really to deliver solar in which it's beneficial both on rooftops and carports so that we can see, I'll say, a doubling effect of the environmental impact of what this legislation could do.
So at its cheapest form, you were talking about 12 cents, I guess, a kilowatt hour versus traditional sources of energy are anywhere from 6 to 8.
Well, so in Howard County, we have representation for Howard County here. So we actually, in a competitive bid process, beat Brown Power rates here in Maryland as a commercial and industrial solar provider. So BrickPack, which I believe is the Baltimore Regional Cooperative for Purchasing something committee, had a rate at around 7.5 cents forecasted out at a 2% escalator for the next 25 years. Our company, as part of this 30 megawatt portfolio with Howard County, actually beat Brown Power projections for Howard County as the ratepayer in this example on that 25-year curve. So we can, with this SACP,
With
to
the
your
subsidy,
point,
you can
be able to beat
With
Brown
the
Power
subsidy.
rates. Absolutely.
Okay.
For a 25-year contract.
25-year fixed rate contract with
And-
no volatility to the Brown Power.
And I'm
market.
sorry, you keep referring to your company. What's your company again?
It's a very creative name, CI Renewables, which is just commercial and industrial renewables.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir. And we banished everybody from Howard County on our committee, so there's actually nobody here. Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question, I guess, is for the solar expert, maybe the same gentleman or anyone else who is the expert. And it's more of the macro picture questions that I have. With the RPS, how long has it been in place in the state?
I remember working on it, I think in 2005 or 6 when it was created.
So a while. And it was here to kickstart renewable, it was put into place in part, if not completely, to kickstart renewable energy. And so here we are 18 years later. And after 18 years, it seems that solar still hasn't figured out a business model that works without subsidies. Does that sound about right?
Solar as an industry is a annuity market, right? We're in the business of building generational assets or generation assets. So yes, I think in every contemplation of a alternative compliance payment or SREC market, I don't believe there's a state that hasn't contemplated a subsidy or an incentive component in order to bridge a gap.
So that's
as
a yes. And
cost
that's important.
efficiency.
This is important. It's an important conversation, I think, because what we just acknowledged in the committee is that for at least almost a couple of decades, we've had subsidies in place because the industry hasn't been able to figure out a business model that works otherwise. And I just want to put this out there too. It's interesting because certainly with me, if tomorrow I could have a power plant at my house, you know, solar or wind or something like that, and that power plant could be backed up with batteries, and I could disconnect from my power company and be completely independent of them, and at the same time save a few dollars, I would do it tomorrow. And I feel like that would catch on across the state really, really fast. And where I'm going with this is, it hasn't happened yet. And every year we keep seeing these price, this is really price fixing. We're not competitive, so we need price fixing in order to stay competitive. And I guess my question is, at what point are you going to become profitable, or does your business model just not work?
If I might, Delegate, we've had these conversations, I think, in your office over the years. I'm happy to come talk with you more about it. I grew up in Western Maryland. I have seen in the budget in Maryland, we have a coal tax credit, that I think is still maybe not in the budget anymore, but we've incentivized all kinds of energy generation. And this piece of legislation specifically is looking at the policies we have in place to tweak them slightly so that instead of ratepayers paying an alternative compliance fee, they're actually paying for solar energy, and that is the intent of this legislation.
And I just want to say as my last point, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this. My last point is just, again, from the macro standpoint, and I can't emphasize this enough, is I am certain every constituent I have tomorrow would convert to the energy that you make your living on, solar, if it really did work and pay for itself and create that power plant for them so they could disconnect from the power plant. Tomorrow they would do it, every single one of my constituents. But they're not, and there's a reason for it. And all I'm saying is, this is the reason. And I would be happy to speak with you in the office. Go ahead, sir, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and I'd be happy to join you in that discussion. I would say the SACP is a portion of the overall problem that you're probably seeing with your constituents not adopting solar, local zoning, HOAs. That's why community solar as a pilot program now exists, because a lot of your constituents probably are renting in multifamily homes. So this is a multi-layer issue, but the SACP, to Jen's point, is really something to ensure today we continue to deliver solar. But happy to continue that conversation with you.
I just want to make one comment because I think we've gone into a larger conversation, especially for the folks who are new to ECM. So we're having a philosophical question, a comment about RPS, which is our Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. That's the standard that says that Maryland is going to go from fossil fuel, transition to fossil fuel, to various modes of renewable energy, wind, solar, hydrogen. But we don't have nuclear in there like some folks would like us to have. So that RPS standard is as far we're talking about, is not changing. We don't expect that to change. We've already heard the governor say that we want to even be more aggressive with that. And within that standard, some of that renewable energy should be solar, some of it will be wind and other modes. So what we're trying to say is we want to make sure that percentage that is wind gets all of the benefit we can to provide that to our customers. So again, the argument that I'm saying solar, not wind. Wind is another day. So we like wind too. But the argument that solar hasn't met that is a bigger question. True, we have to address that, and we're trying to address the stagnation with solar today. But we're not changing the RPS standards, Delegate Fisher. So that's a bigger conversation we need to have. Okay, thank you.
Delegate Howard.
But this isn't at you, Delegate. But we have changed the RPS standard. We've done a lot in this committee over the years in a bipartisan effort, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, to manipulate, I don't know if that's the correct term.
Well, that's not my goal today.
No, I know that, but SREC prices, we've changed percentages for standards, for solar, these type of things. And what it reminds me of, and it is a little bit different, but I sit on the alcohol subcommittee, is the barrel limits. Everybody kept coming in year after year after year, barrel limits, we need to make more, we need to do this, we need to do that. And much to my colleague's point, I think he's correct in his analysis. And I guess, Jen, what I'm asking for you is, and I'm going to research it myself, is I've been here 9 years, which isn't a terrible amount of time, but it's long enough to know better. I want to know, and I want to go through the history of what has been done to spur the growth and use of solar in this state and what that equates to moving forward, almost like a perspective, but looking backwards. I'm going to research it myself through the library, and I think it's time that we do get some type of grasp of some of the subsidies that have been given to the industry and what they've amounted to over the past, I've been here 9 years, so we'll call it decade. So if we can sit down and have that type of conversation, I mean, just 2 years ago, I think during COVID, we talked about removing caps on ACP so that we could make room for geothermal. And there's been a very, very broad conversation. As far as the renewable portfolio standard is concerned, just on a personal note, I think it has kind of become a political football. And I think it is time for a real and holistic conversation moving forward. But speaking specifically to solar and what we've done to try to help this industry, and I'm a huge believer because of the mobility and the energy delivery that it can deliver, without line loss and those type of things. I'm a huge believer in solar. I'd like to know from a larger standpoint of whether it's dollars, programs, SREC prices, freezing, whatever it is, what we've done, and I would like you to give me that information. I'm serious. I want that information. I'm going to look it up, and I'm going to have my staff in my library and myself research it as well, so we can get a very broad overview of what has been done to help spur this industry in Maryland to help us meet our goals moving forward. I think it's time that we have a real 100,000-foot view of what we've been doing.
Sure, we're happy to come talk with you. I don't know if you want us to.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Delegate Frazier Hidalgo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that this is a very good conversation to have, and I think while this is my first year on this committee, we've had these conversations in ENT, and we've had these conversations in this committee as well. And I think it's very important to really place this in context. When I say place it in context, I mean the playing field. So when we talk about the incentives for wind and for solar, are we also having conversations about the incentives for fossil fuels? And the reason I say that is because my understanding is that we incentivize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of over $100 billion. I also understand that while we have been incentivizing solar for the last, 15 or 20 years, we've been incentivizing fossil fuels for well over 100 years. As my understanding is, the first fossil fuel incentive was given in 1916. Do you have any comment on those facts and kind of leveling the playing field? Because I think if we were to remove all of those incentives for the fossil fuel industry, then maybe we would be closer to a level playing field, and maybe alternatives would not be needed in incentives for renewables.
Thank you, Delegate. I believe you were out of the room when I made a similar point, and I think it's worth repeating. We welcome having that larger conversation. This piece of legislation is urgently needed for solar developers that are pricing out projects over the next 3 or 4 years, working with hospitals in the Baltimore region. This will drive solar development so that ratepayers are paying to build solar and not the alternative compliance fee. So that's what this piece of legislation contemplates. We're happy to come meet with folks individually to talk further about the bill, but to your point, I agree fully. And it's taken us some time as policymakers. You all meet every year because the policy you have in place may need to be tweaked when COVID impacts the cost of development. And as I also mentioned in my testimony, the alternative compliance payments in Maryland are far lower than the region. Solar developers are developing solar in other states. They're building it. We want them to build it here in Maryland, and that's what this bill will do.
Right, thank you.
I do want to just make a comment that I know we're going to need to end this, but you're killing me for making me come for allowing me to do this. But the point that the delegate is making is this is not uncommon that we have to incentivize energy infrastructure in doing it. So this is not an uncommon thing. It's uncommon to us because we're talking about the renewable energy, but we've been doing it for gas and fossil fuels, as you said, for years. And that is the way it gets done, is through these incentives. So.
All right, this concludes this panel. Next, I have one more favorable witness, Bill Kress.
Not on this one. We're on 511, I think.
All right, I'm lying to you. All right, I have one favorable with amendment, Brian Anlou.
That's
it. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Brian Anlou, not Bill Kress. Good afternoon, members of the committee. I'm with the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metro DC, and our members are supportive of renewable energy and solar in particular. However, many of our members have signed long-term energy contracts under the existing rates and are concerned with the impact that this bill will have on these contracts. AOBA respectfully requests that the bill be amended to grandfather in existing contracts. Commercial multifamily owners and managers must have time to understand the change in law and realign their budgets and capital spending, which are done many years in advance, particularly during these uncertain economic times. For our members, the goal should be to keep our residential and office building operating budgets as stable as possible and to aid in their overall recovery. There's some precedents for doing this, including in the 2019 Maryland Clean Energy Jobs Act. I've included some text from that bill that grandfathers in existing contracts. So I hope you will all adopt those amendments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have no questions and no further witnesses on this bill, so that concludes this bill hearing. Delegate Queen, what one do you want to take next? I'm here for you today.
I think Bill Kress wants
to testify? All right, we'll go to House Bill 513. Bill, come on up.
I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. This one might be long, too. Okay, don't ask all these questions. We can make it short.
Real quick, so I have Lyuna signed up as favorable and favorable with amendments. You're both representing Lyuna? Okay, Lisa Smith, do you want to just come up too for info, and then we can just get through this? All right, whenever you're ready, Delegate.
All right, again, Chairman Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee, thank you again for indulging me with these bills that are sparking some conversation, so this is good. HB 513, Investor-Owned Utilities Prevailing Wage Enforcement. This is really intended to clarify law that was enacted that contractors hired by investor utilities that they need to pay prevailing wage for certain underground utility work. And so there's been some confusion or non-cooperation from some parties. And so the goal is just to ensure that all the utility contractors pay the appropriate prevailing wage and some clarification on what department will set those wages and based on what we do have already available for classification for this type of work, and that there is some enforcement and oversight. So again, this bill is just to clarify who's doing what. And as you see in many of the amendments, that's what they're asking for, is that this gets clarified that the Department of Labor is in charge with setting those rates, and we will be ready based on what we have already in place, and then we'll have the oversight by PSC as typical. That's all I have. We ask for a favorable response on this bill as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Crosby, Delegate Queen, all the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Brian Petruska. I am General Counsel of the Mid-Atlantic region for the Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA. LIUNA represents the craft classification of construction laborer. Our members play a critical role in helping utilities to provide light, warmth, and water to the residents of Maryland. I'm here to speak to you today about supporting HB 513, but provided certain amendments are made, that will give clear statutory authorization to the Maryland Department of Labor to enforce prevailing wage requirements that are set forth in Public Utility Articles 5-305 of the Maryland Code. In December 2021, the Maryland General Assembly enacted PUA 5305, a law that ensured wage stability to Maryland construction workers in the utility sector by establishing prevailing wage requirements on construction contractors employed by investor-owned gas, electric, and combined gas and electric utilities on underground construction work. Unfortunately, the Maryland Department of Labor is not clearly authorized by statute to provide guidance to contractors regarding what prevailing wages apply to construction work covered by PUA 5-305. Instead, the Maryland Public Service Commission is the sole entity currently in the state government with authority to enforce this law. The problem, however, is that the Public Service Commission does not have the resources or expertise to provide compliance guidance to construction contractors regarding the application of prevailing wages to their workforce, nor does it have the ability to enforce individual claims. Instead, all that expertise lies with the Maryland Department of Labor, which is why LIUNA is supporting giving clear statutory authorization for Department of Labor to enforce PUA 5-305. And so we would ask for a favorable report on this bill with amendments to provide that clear authority. Thank you.
Lisa, you're just here for information, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm here for questions.
Delegate Adams.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question I have is, the bill doesn't appear to apply, but I'm going to ask the question to make sure that what I'm posing isn't going to be part of this bill. You've got developers who are developing, private projects. You can imagine new construction where the underneath the building is the housing where the utilities come in. I assume like the breakers or the transformers or the switches, whatever that ends up being, and the utilities flow through to that piece, to that part of the building. Now that building's not part of prevailing wage, it's a private project. Prevailing wage only applies to public works projects. So does this bill extend its application to the construction of the building, or is it just purely just about the utilities and the work that they do?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. Just to be clear, this would only apply to underground utility work. So what you're referring to is typically called utility site work. That would not be subject to prevailing wage.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Seeing no other questions and no other witnesses, that concludes.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, you want to testify now?
If you don't mind.
You smiled and pointed to your colleague.
I wouldn't let him go first. He's the client.
Oh, is that what it is? Wow. Okay, I thought you were just up there for moral support as well.
I'll be brief.
Okay,
I want to give you the background on this.
Name?
For the record, Bill Kress, representing LIUNA. I want to give you the background on what's going on here. So this bill was passed 2 years ago, was vetoed. The veto was overridden. It's been enforced for a year. Unfortunately, only about 30% of the contractors are compliant, or at least that's what we think the rates are. And the confusion has been, what is the correct rate? What is the classification for the folks working on these projects? So I've attempted to meet with all the stakeholders and come up with amendments that are going to correct these problems. I think we have agreement from the Public Service Commission. They're going to be let out from enforcement. Enforcement will now be with the Department of Labor. They'll have the ability to rule on classification issues, wage issues. I think the pushback from the Department of Labor initially was they have to set up a new database. It's going to be costly. They're going to have 2 pins that they have to appropriate. I think we've come up with amendments that will allow them to do it in a cost-efficient way. They're going to use the current wages found in highway construction. There's a database of wages. There's classifications that apply to these projects. And so with that, I think the Department of Labor is okay. The utilities, I've met with them. We agree that it should be the Department of Labor. I'm waiting to hear back with them with respect to a couple of other amendments, which are, this will take effect in July. In addition, we're going to have amnesty for any contractor who's not in compliance. They'll have until July to be in compliance. And that essentially are the amendments that we're discussing. And so I would ask the committee to hold any action on the bill until we get the amendments back to you.
Okay. Anything else? Am I good to end this one?
Thank you.
All right, that concludes this bill hearing. Next up.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Next up, Delegate Queen, House Bill 630.
Oh, man.
Just run the gauntlet.
Wow, I did. I'm about to go play the lottery ticket next after that. Thank you. And they didn't think they were coming up this early. Oh, really? Okay, we're really getting good. Come on. So actually, this is a bill that we've had a lot of conversation with and worked with all those involved, and I think we have a great fix. So we'll just tell you what we're doing and the intent of the bill, and let me know if you have any questions. So again, Delegate Queen, I'm here for HB 630, Public Utilities, Primary and Secondary Account Holders, Domestic Violence Protection. So again, Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. So what HB 630 is doing is allowing victims of domestic violence that have a court order to be removed from and not be financially responsible for shared utility contracts or agreement. And so this bill outlines that utility companies will provide information on options and the process for domestic violence victims to be removed from a shared contract or agreement, in some public-facing communication. Also, the person's information will be, and that the process for maintaining confidentiality and treatment of this information and storage of this information will be outlined by the public utilities. So this is really a way to allow for victims of domestic violence to have a fresh start without having the burden of a utility bill or debt hanging over them. And so this is, we know that there'll be different methods as to way the different utilities will address the accounts on a name, but the bill's intent is pretty consistent. So everybody understands or recognizes that we don't want to have domestic violence victims tied to some debt because of a shared name on an account. And so we have talked to all the utilities, and I believe we have all come to some agreement that they can find a way to make this happen. So because of that, we ask for a favorable recommendation on HB 630. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Melanie Shapiro. I'm the Public Policy Director with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. We are the federally recognized state domestic violence coalition in Maryland. I'd like to thank Delegate Queen for her leadership on this bill. It's often asked why victims of domestic violence don't leave, and there's no one simple answer because the answer is different for each individual. What we do know is that we need to remove as many barriers as possible to enable a victim to safely escape the violence. However, in order to leave, a victim needs access to safe and affordable housing. In order to live somewhere, you need electricity and you need water. I would encourage you to read the full testimony submitted by Lydia Watts. She's the executive director of ROAR, a victim service program in Baltimore City. She tells the story of Ruth, a made-up name for a client. She's a woman who was engaged in safety planning with ROAR. A carefully developed plan was being crafted so she and her children could leave the abuse she had endured for 10 years by her husband while he was away for a few days. ROAR used their funds to help with a security deposit, first month's rent, and a moving van. They helped secure furniture and find Ruth a job near her new home. And then Ruth tried to set up a BGE account. That was when she learned that, unbeknownst to her, she was on the account at the home she was trying to escape, and there was an unpaid balance. This account stood between violence and safety. ROAR, a nonprofit organization, made an exception and paid the balance so that Ruth and her children could be safe. Many of the organizations I have spoken to have represented and worked with a Ruth. I will not go through all of the statistics, but 94 to 99% of victims of domestic violence are also victims of financial abuse, and 38% of victims of domestic violence are homeless at some point in their lives. We want victims to be able to leave and not end up homeless. Leaving an abusive relationship is like untangling a web, and it is done in secret to protect the victim's life. HB 630 addresses one of those tangles. We therefore urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dorothy Lenig. I'm the director of the Domestic Violence Legal Clinic at the House of Ruth. The House of Ruth serves victims of domestic violence throughout the state, and we have offices in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County. When I started at the House of Ruth, we always talked about the difference between direct services and advocacy. And they would always tell the story if you're standing on the edge of the river and babies are floating down the river and you're pulling them out as fast as you can to keep them from drowning. And advocacy was when you went upstream and tried to figure out why the babies were being put in the river and what you could do to change it. And I think of this bill the same way. When you have clients like Ruth, if they're lucky, they get to the House of Ruth or to another domestic violence program. And if you're really lucky, she'll get an advocate who can either negotiate with the utility company or maybe they have some money to give her. But this bill would change the law for everybody. So any victim in that situation would be able to benefit from it. Because if a victim is able to get away from her abuser and able to get to a safe new home, she shouldn't have to be lucky to be able to turn on the lights or have running water. We urge a favorable report on House Bill 630. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Laurie Ruth. I'm the legal director at the Women's Law Center of Maryland. I want to thank Delegate Queen for bringing this bill. The Women's Law Center has protective order projects in 3 counties, and we have a statewide project that's called Collateral Legal Assistance for Survivors. When people come to our protective order projects, they're in an immediate danger and seeking safety posture, but it's really more in the safety planning and trying to get out of a relationship or after you've achieved that initial safety that an issue like this comes up. It is part of the power and control dynamic in intimate partner violence cases, this financial manipulation and financial power and control. Sometimes we see a case such as the one Ms. Shapiro mentioned where the abuser controls the money, the purse strings as you will, and may put all over most of the bills in their victim's name, and she has no knowledge or maybe ability to do anything about it, and it's a way to keep her from being able to leave the home. And it is very much a part of the very perennial question we get, which is why doesn't she just leave, or why don't they just leave? It is this intertwining of the financial issues that causes the problem, and this bill addresses a very important part because, as demonstrated by that story, when you're trying to set up a new household to get away, to move forward and start a new reality, you can't do that if you can't get a bill in your own name and move forward. And so for those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Alice Mutter. I am the senior attorney for family law at Maryland Legal Aid. Maryland Legal Aid serves low-income Marylanders across the state, and we are the largest nonprofit law firm in the state of Maryland. We do urge a favorable report of House Bill 630. And in addition to practicing family law, I also practice housing and consumer law. Legal Aid frequently represents tenants who are facing eviction as well as consumers facing debt collection actions. What I urge this committee to consider is the outstanding and devastating effect that utility bills in particular can have on a survivor's ability to get new housing, to maintain housing, and to be financially independent. Although the statute of limitations for breach of contract cases is only 3 years in the state of Maryland, under Maryland law, utility companies can deny somebody utility services for up to 7 years for a single unpaid utility bill. This prevents folks from getting a new utility contract set up in a new home. They may face debt collection actions, and they may even face eviction. Even if somebody is no longer in the home, there may still be eviction proceedings for their prior residents that list them as a tenant, and that can affect federally subsidized housing, and it can also lead to discrimination when they are searching for new housing. And so Maryland and federal law has already recognized the significant importance of protecting the housing rights of survivors, but there's a gap right now, and that gap is with utility bills. Maryland law allows folks to get out of leases early. It requires landlords to change the locks where necessary for safety purposes, and it also allows survivors to be protected from eviction as a result of their domestic violence, but they are not protected with these utility companies. And given the drastic economic consequences, this is something that can severely impact a survivor's ability to leave the relationship and for independence. We do urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. I think it's a good bill. The concept, I think, is important.
And the only question I have, and it goes to some of the testimony, the written testimony from some of the utility companies who also seem like they're in support of the bill generally, is just, so if you go to page 2, line 11 and 12 talks about certified files of records from a court of law. Obviously things that, I don't want to use the word prove, but it's easy for a third party to say, oh, obviously there's an issue of domestic violence here. The question that I have is, and Delegate Queen, you alluded to it in the beginning, is there going to be an amendment that kind of either narrows or cleans up lines 13 through 21 about what a utility would need to see in order to allow someone to kind of get out of the contract?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Delegate Pippi. So already existing in law, the language on lines 11 through 21. So to be eligible for the address confidentiality program, which is operated through the Secretary of State, which is something that victims of domestic violence are eligible for, that is the documentation that they require.
Okay.
They also require, to be eligible for the program, that you move to a new residence. So in order to sort of get out and be eligible for the address confidentiality program, you need to have a new residence to go to. And you can't establish new utilities in a new residence if you found yourself in this situation. Similarly, last year, the General Assembly passed, I believe what technically passed was SB 6. It was in this body as HB 86, which was the Tenant Protection Act. Delegate Stewart was the lead on that bill, and that allowed, it enhanced the ability to terminate a lease early. And it has similar language in that bill to the eligibility requirements that are in this bill as well. So what we took was existing law, existing documentation requirements that are accepted in both those situations.
Okay, so, and just again, for my own edification, so some of the concerns that the utilities brought up was what their interpretation of that the language was too broad, right? And that it could lead to, what was the word? Actually, it looks like they have a general template letter of opposition from everybody, which is not a good look, but it said heightened unscrupulous conduct. Okay. So my only question is, this is a real issue, and there are definitely Marylanders that come into this issue a lot in the state. And so is there a way to, is the language that's in this bill, is that the final product? Or is there going to be some sort of kind of narrowing that up and cleaning that up just to alleviate any concerns of heightened unscrupulous conduct, if that makes sense?
I'm happy to engage and have talked to some of the utility companies already. What I would say is that, first of all, the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when they try and leave. It increases both the risk of lethality as well as the level of violence can increase as well. Not every victim utilizes all of the processes. So to require a victim, we have moved away from requiring a protective order because many victims don't get a protective order, because if they do, the abuser is then served with that protective order and they may be killed. And on Tuesday, we're actually going to memorialize the victims of domestic violence homicide in Maryland. I believe there were 56 victims of domestic violence homicide in 2022. And so I think to require that level of documentation is not appropriate. I think that we're absolutely willing to engage in a conversation regarding the other language, but domestic violence programs like the House of Ruth, like Legal Aid, like the Women's Law Center, are where victims are going to, most of it's done in confidence and in safety, and when their abuser doesn't know that they're there. And so that type of documentation should be accepted.
Perfect.
And it is under law right now.
So that's what I want to know. So the final thing is, this is the template language that's in other programs that qualify people to have relief. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, Delegate Weibel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. I see that the language says that they can be released from the contract without incurring a fee, and the payment on arrears can't be can't be mandated before opening a new account. But what about security deposits? So the security deposit could be so high at the new location, and I feel sure that you all can work out the language that the utilities have concern with, but the security deposit could be set so high at the new location based on the payment history that the abused could potentially not be able to open up that new account.
I'm happy to address that. So security deposits are generally assessed by the management company. They are entirely separate from utilities. It's where you have a history of, for example, eviction proceedings or judgments against you in rent court that that those security deposits are often increased. And so it's really a 2 steps removed here, where you have utility bills that can lead to eviction or other collections cases, which are then what are leading to the higher security deposits at a new location. And so there are, that is why with the existing ability for survivors to get out of leases early, that would address some of the concerns as to security deposits, because you wouldn't have, there are laws that specifically govern the return of security deposits that are separate from a utility bill.
All right, I see your point on that, but don't utilities generally also base security deposits based on the history of that payer with that company itself? So if there was a history, I mean, obviously, if you're in an abusive relationship, you're probably going to have some bills that have been paid late with the utility itself. So the bill doesn't address security deposits at all, does it?
Well, so utility companies don't frequently require security deposits as part of their services, to my knowledge.
That's not my experience, but okay.
Traditionally, the security deposit is through the management company, not through the utility company. When you set up a new utility account, they might assess late fees or hold you responsible for past due bills, but it's not managed the same way as.
Are you referring to accounts that are in the individual's name or accounts that are in a management company's name that are then allocated to the individual?
If I could just, so there are some times where the utility companies will charge a deposit, especially if they have a history of not paying or paying late or having arrears. That's not what this bill is about. There are states who have addressed it for victims of domestic violence. I believe it's Texas, Illinois, one of the MI states. I don't want to say the wrong one, but there's a few states that have addressed that portion of it and have a waiver at a minimum for a period of time for that. But that's not what this bill does.
But that was my point, and
Yeah.
actually I received a text from someone during your presentation that the security deposit was set fairly high for them, and so your bill addresses part of it, but there's still a part out there that maybe it doesn't address.
And that's correct. We took a very narrow approach on this bill, and it is, as I said, it is a very hard and long process for a victim of domestic violence to get out. And this is the first point and the first step that needs to happen. And it was a decision that we made to come in on this particular issue and get them out of the contract, and then see how, implement that, and then we'll potentially have to address the deposits and coming in with a waiver if that's something that we can address through legislation as well. It could also be done through policy. It's certainly something.
Right, it may not need legislation.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that concludes this panel. We have Jessica Emerson, and then we'll go to the one virtual, which is Dorothy Lenning.
I believe Debbie Feinstein is the virtual.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Thank
I
you.
apologize. I looked down too quick.
No, I'm still.
Yep.
Thought I was going to be all alone up here. I didn't know whether to be terrified or if I should stretch out. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Emerson, and I direct the Human Trafficking Prevention Project, which seeks to reduce the collateral consequences of criminal legal involvement for survivors of human trafficking. We also engage in systemic advocacy designed to prevent exploitation in populations who are put at highest risk. One of those are those who have experienced domestic violence. I'm here with a little bit of a different take on this, which is that the intersection between economic stability and domestic violence is an essential but often overlooked aspect of both healing and, in the inverse, re-victimization. While there is a documented relationship between high levels of financial strain and rates of domestic violence, this relationship is also reciprocal, meaning that the very act of experiencing domestic violence also causes financial problems for survivors, often trapping them in poverty and, in the process, the abusive relationship. You heard from the earlier panelists, for many victims, concerns over their ability to provide for themselves and their children are the reason that they stay in or return to an abusive relationship. Others, however, may remain in an abusive relationship simply because they can't afford to leave. And this is where HB 630 comes in. In addition to the obvious safety concerns shared by my colleagues, many survivors are unable to financially shoulder the burden of the fees, penalties, and charges that apply to having their names removed from a shared account so they can open a new one, or I should say, prematurely terminating a utilities contract. This bill, I like to refer to it as tiny but mighty, but would help alleviate these concerns. As I stated earlier, economic stability is a primary means to long-term independence and safety for survivors of domestic violence, many of whom have experienced human trafficking. From financial literacy to asset building, job readiness programs, entrepreneurship, economic empowerment programs cover a wide range of efforts designed to help support an individual's immediate and long-term economic independence. DV and human trafficking victim service providers have sought to adapt these models to better meet the unique needs of survivors, and this bill is a prime example of that. Assisting survivors in addressing their basic financial needs helps them find safety and build long-term security for themselves, and for these reasons, the Human Trafficking Prevention Project respectfully urges a favorable report on HB 630. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, we'll go to our virtual testimony, which is Debbie Feinstein.
Good afternoon, members of the Economic Matters Committee, to Chair Wilson and Vice Chair Crosby. My name is Debbie Feinstein. I'm Chief of the Special Victims Division for the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office. I also co-chair the Maryland State's Attorneys Association Subcommittee for Special Victims, Prosecutions, and Cases related to domestic violence. I come to you today on behalf of the MSAA, myself and my boss, John McCarthy, to support HB 630 and to urge this committee to vote it favorably. I was going to say many of the things that my colleagues have said, and I would just add and confirm, as a domestic violence prosecutor for almost 23 years at this point, I can't tell you the number of cases that I have seen where financial barriers are the thing that stands in the way of a victim or survivor participating in a criminal prosecution. Now, of course, a criminal prosecution is not the end-all be-all. And we know as prosecutors that we're just seeing one small slice of what a victim, survivor of domestic violence is going through. But I do know in the cases that I've handled, which have been hundreds, and the cases that my division has handled, which has been thousands, that financial insecurity is one of the main barriers. And it's incredibly important for us to tear barriers down to increase the likelihood of accountability for the offender and safety for the survivor. I would also echo what my colleague said about the nexus to lethality and what comes up when a survivor of domestic violence, when a victim of domestic violence pushes back and seeks to end the relationship or seeks to challenge anything in the relationship. Again, in the course of my career, I've seen this many times. I would encourage this committee to support HB 630 so that we can give accountability to offenders and we can support survivors, most importantly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And seeing no questions and no further witnesses, that concludes this bill hearing. Next, we'll go to Delegate Wilkins, House Bill 721. Whenever you're ready, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much to the committee for allowing me to come testify this afternoon. For the record, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins, and I'm pleased to present House Bill 721. I'm introducing this bill at the request of a constituent who came to the District 20 team with what we think was an important issue. So the scenario is this: if an officer pulls any of us over, it's likely that they'll ask for three things: license, registration, and proof of insurance. And the insurance card that you may have, it probably lists the main insured person, but it likely may not list your children, your spouse, or others who are also on your insurance. For my constituent, she felt distress and concern that with her kids who are learning how to drive, that if they're pulled over by an officer, their name would not be included on the insurance card. And especially with the increase in carjackings and car thefts, concern about just there being greater suspicion, around vehicles and cars that are pulled over. The bill requires that at renewal and upon request, the insurance card be provided that lists additional drivers. I've requested an amendment, which you should have, we did share it with the committee, that makes it clear this applies only to personal private insurance, not commercial. I understand that the car insurance providers do have some concerns, including reprogramming internally, but I do think when it comes to just ensuring the peace of mind and making this request, that our constituents should be able to do so. Thank you so much for your time, and I urge a favorable report.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this panel. We have one favorable with amendment, and that is Marta Harding. Madam Vice Chair, you can bounce if you have to go back to your committee. We get it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Marta Harding here on behalf of State Farm. Just briefly, and we appreciate the Vice Chair Wilkins' intent in introducing this bill and her concern for the constituent, and we're happy to work with her and the committee on the bill. I think just to provide some background information that might be useful to the committee, the concept of a named insured, which is what you see in the bill, is a term of art in insurance, and it basically means the person either that owns the car or that co-owns the car. That's what the term means. It's not the same thing as who is insured under the policy. In Maryland, insurance follows the vehicle. So if I'm the only named insured under my policy because I'm the only one that owns my car and my husband uses my car and he hits somebody, my insurance policy is going to kick in. If he gets pulled over by a trooper for speeding and the trooper asks for the information that he or she most certainly will include the proof of insurance, what will demonstrate that he is driving in accordance with Maryland law is my insurance card, because my insurance card, even though it will say my name, not his, will have the VIN number. And that's what's going to satisfy the Maryland law requirement to have the minimum security. So I think that, the concern, if there is somebody that is stopped and Delegate Wilkins' constituents' kids, if they're pulled over and they produce that card, that's going to satisfy the law in terms of what has to be in effect. We as introduced, our concern with the bill is just that it seemed to have a requirement that we would need to produce multiple cards. That was our only concern with the bill as introduced. We just want to be able to issue one card with both named insureds on it. But we don't think it can extend beyond to additional insureds because there'd be no way to list who's covered. So, sorry. Does that answer any questions?
Yep, that concludes this bill hearing. Seeing no questions, I thank everybody for coming in. Next, we'll go to Delegate Charkoudian. We'll go House Bill 323. And just start when your panel's up and ready.
Is there someone else who's supposed to be on my panel? Sorry. Okay, gotcha. Come on up. Who are you with? Oh, yes, absolutely. Great, thank you. Someone else missing? Okay. All right. Mr. Chair, colleagues, for the record, Delegate Lori Charkoudian, and I think we're presenting House Bill 323, asking for a favorable report. So I think folks are fairly familiar with the way that utility assistance works. We heard about it on the first day in the overviews that we had during the first couple of weeks of session. For those of you who were working with constituents during the pandemic, you probably saw a lot of your constituents needing utility assistance, worked with them to try to get it. One of the tragic things about utility assistance is that lots of people in the state are eligible for utility assistance and many of them don't receive it. And they don't receive it because the structures that we have to apply for it are broken. They're broken in any number of ways, and some of the folks here will talk about them. Among other things, we recently learned that about 80% of people who start the online application to get utility assistance actually abandon it. Now, some of them may subsequently get it through paper applications or through getting some assistance, but that's a pretty huge and problematic number when you think about somebody saying, I really need help with my bill, and then starting a process and then saying, I can't even get through this process. And so if we really want to make sure that folks who are eligible for this service receive the service, the simplest thing to do, and frankly the most efficient thing to do in terms of thinking about government resources, is what's called categorical eligibility. And that's essentially that folks who receive SNAP benefits And SNAP, among all the safety net services, is the one that most people are familiar with and most likely to apply for and most likely to renew. And so what this bill does is it lines up the requirements for our energy assistance programs with SNAP benefits, increasing from 175% to 200% for energy of poverty for energy assistance, and essentially says that when you apply and enroll in SNAP, you're automatically enrolled in energy assistance. Now, if someone doesn't want the energy assistance, they can choose not to have it because they wouldn't provide their account number, but basically it automatically enrolls people. And so it really is the most efficient way and the most streamlined way to make sure that people get the assistance that they are eligible for. The couple things that I just want to point out, there's a question about the increased cost. If we're actually serving all the people who are eligible for this, given that we're not serving them now, there will be an increased cost. You'll note the fiscal note. And I just want to remind you of this, and I'll pass these around. It's also in your, it's in the system, it's in the files. This line going up right here is, this is the RGGI auction results, and they are increasing, and RGGI is one of the primary sources of funding for our EUSP program. You might recall that when MEA was going through what we do with RGGI funds, 50% of the RGGI funds go to EUSP, and so the primary source of EUSP is an increasing funding source and will continue to increase. So we can talk more about some of the specifics of how it'll get funded, but the core source of it is on the right trajectory. So that's the good news. I'll pass it to panel members and then happy to take questions. Why don't you go next? David, yes.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'll be brief. We have 450,000 Maryland households who are up to 200% of the federal poverty level. For a family of 4 in 2022, that's just $55,000 a year. So 200% is a pretty low income. Those people are living day to day. Electric rates are on the rise. We had the commission approved back at the end of 2020 a multi-year plan for BGE that raises rates about 10% for the average BGE customer for 2022 and another 4% for 2023. And those rate impacts were partially offset, so they're only starting to be felt today. We have inflation. Electricity prices are rising higher than the rate of inflation. Just this week, they show, compared to last year, electricity inflation raised rates 12%, and that's compared to about 6% for general inflation. So rates are on the rise. HB 323 is part of the solution to this. It's only a part, but it will provide immediate rate relief. We did a report in September of 2022, and it showed that we showed that the Maryland energy burden for those who live up to 200%, incomes up to 200% of the poverty level, Maryland's energy burden is 12% of household gross income, which is much higher than the national average, which is about 6.5%. But for customers who were receiving benefits, their burden dropped to 9%. So this bill is an important means of addressing that. I'll wrap up. I want to say April 1, utility protections against terminations are being lifted, have been lifted by the Public Service Commission. So we are going to see terminations. You may hear from constituents. Our office is available to help those. We have resources on our website, and you can have them call us. But this bill is important to address that. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the Economic Matters Committee. Thank you all for lending us the opportunity to speak today. My name is JD Robinson, and I am the Program Coordinator for SNAP at Maryland Hunger Solutions. For the past 10 years, we have assisted anyone in the state of Maryland with applying to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and directing them to local pantries and food banks. For the past 3 years, the majority of this work has been done over the phone, where we field over 400 to 500 calls a month from people looking to apply for SNAP, as well as additional energy assistance, healthcare, and other programs. Applying for these benefit programs is not an easy task. We often equate the process to doing your taxes. It's headache-inducing, time-consuming, and often requires the help of a navigator. To ask low-income individuals and families to apply for these programs multiple times over multiple courses of the year only increases their frustration and potentially their distrust. Ensuring automatic enrollment across these programs through this legislation can greatly alleviate the burden that these families face and reduce administrative time and effort that the caseworkers have for reviewing them. These additional benefits will be critical in the months to come as households continue to navigate the loss of multiple pandemic-related programs, including the nearly $70 million a month in SNAP that we will be losing starting next month. 360,000 SNAP households will be seeing a decrease in their monthly benefit, with some households potentially losing hundreds of dollars of SNAP benefits per month. These families will be turning to additional programs like Energy Assistance for Help, and allowing them to do so effectively, easily, and automatically will advance health equity and well-being of our most vulnerable Marylanders. Thank you. Maryland Hunger Solutions urges a favorable report on House Bill 323.
Vice Chair Crosby and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 323. This bill will streamline the process for individuals that receive certain benefits to be automatically enrolled in utility assistance. My name is Jordan Holden, and I'm the policy intern with the CASH Campaign of Maryland. CASH stands for Creating Assets, Savings, and Hope, and we promote the economic advancement for low to moderate income individuals and families in Baltimore and across Maryland. More than half of our clients earn less than $20,000 annually, with many earning less than $10,000. Last year in Maryland, CASH screened and enrolled 270 households in which they received over $200,000 of benefit assistance, while 358 households received financial navigation support and were connected to over 1,200 partner referrals. Us in this room know that benefit programs such as SNAP, Energy Assistance, TAMP, and SSI exist. However, in order to get those resources, you must be able to consistently have access to these offices and be able to receive and keep up with the correspondence. At the point when you receive all of the relevant information, you must then be able to understand what each process and correspondence means, and then again have the means and accessibility to respond promptly or run the risk of missing benefits. Each of these departments have separate application forms, but similar and disconnected processes. In addition, the financial summary notes that individuals financially eligible for SSI are already categorically eligible for SNAP, and recipients of SSI, SNAP, TAMP, and VA benefits are generally eligible for energy assistance. House Bill 323 would automatically enroll SSI recipients in SNAP and automatically enroll SNAP, SSI, TAMP, and VA benefit recipients in energy assistance. Lastly, the fiscal summary notes that DHS advises that approximately 32,000 additional households will qualify for energy assistance under the bill. That's 32,000 families that are able to eat and pay their bills. For these reasons, CASH urges a favorable report on House Bill 323. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Good afternoon, to Chairman Wilson and members of the committee. My name is Roberto Melara, Director of the Maryland Region. On behalf of the Capital Area Food Bank, we offer our support for HB 323 to expand eligibility and enrollment in social services program for low-income Marylanders. The Capital Area Food Bank serves over 200,000 food insecure residents in the two largest counties in Maryland, Prince George's and Montgomery. Last year, we distributed over 23 million meals to Maryland clients through a partner network of more than 180 nonprofit organizations and over 150 direct distribution sites. However, we know that many of our low-income clients are still having to wait through choices on basic necessities, like putting food on their tables or paying their energy bill. While social safety net programs exist to help families meet these basic needs, we often hear from our clients that the application process is prohibitively complicated. The eligibility thresholds are too limited, and each program has different requirements for access, all of which keep clients from obtaining the benefit they need and deserve, and often means more clients are standing in line for emergency food from the food bank and our partners. HB 23 helps address some of these program access barriers. It will expand eligibility threshold and ensure that folks who are already participating in means-tested program like SNAP are automatically considered eligible for energy and utility assistance. This bill will not only increase access and easy application process for neighbors in need, but it will also remove onerous requirement for agencies enrolling individuals in social safety net programs. We strongly encourage a favorable report on HB 323 and appreciate your consideration. We will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick question, Delegate Charkoudian. Thank you for bringing this legislation forward. I was just looking at the fiscal summary and looking at the increase of the expenditures, but my quick question was, and if I missed it in your testimony, I apologize, DHS and OHEP, they are working in conjunction with you, or you've been collaborating with them in this effort, or this is just, you kind of just started this and working, like, I'm saying, have you worked together with them in bringing this legislation forward?
Yeah. In fact, House Bill 606, that was Derek Davis's bill from 21, created a work group to look at this whole process of people enrolling in OHEP. And so I've been on that work group with OHEP, with some of the folks who are here with me. And we've been discussing this for the last year and a half. And so, yes, so all the details of what's here and the need to increase to 200% in order to match them up, all of that was done in conjunction with OHEP and that work group.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question. There was an informational piece that was included in our documentation from the unit that represents the workers. And there were two things that they mentioned, of course, staffing shortages. And probably the bigger thing was the IT issues with, there's, I guess, a program that they use to process these cases called MD Think. Did you see this documentation? Are you aware of it? And then if so, how is there, through your work group or whatever, I guess you probably know about this, and then how are you going to propose to address the concerns?
Yeah, so there's two issues. I need to have a conversation with them. I just saw it. I didn't have a conversation with them until I saw it last night. Because I think there just may be some misunderstanding about what this does. I think part of what this bill does is it streamlines the process, and so it actually takes the burden off the staffing shortage. Like, that's all my understanding from everyone that I've talked to about this, including within OHEP. So I just need to get an understanding of that, and if that's not the case, we'll straighten it out. The point about MD Think is well taken. That is a hugely problematic system. When I was talking about 80% abandoned applications, that's because MD Think is such a problematic application. This legislation doesn't fix MD Think. That really has to be fixed by the Department of Human Services, and I hope they'll take it seriously, because it's like the UI system where like it's, like the system has to be fixed. We can't fix software with legislation. But this will take some of the burden off of MD Think, because if people get through MD Think for SNAP, now they're enrolled, they don't have to get through a separate piece of MD Think for OHEP. So MD Think still needs to be fixed. This doesn't fix it, but this does help, I guess, people get through it.
And really, that was where I was going. I didn't want to end up with the same type of issue that we had before. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And seeing no further questions for this panel, we will move on to Laurel Peltier. And is Marilyn Brooks here? Come on up, ma'am. And start whenever either one of you are ready.
I'm just going to say me too. This is Laurel Peltier. I'm the chair of Maryland Energy Advocates. We work on low-income utility issues. I'm also the AARP utility advocate. This is a brilliant bill, very tactical. I just wanted to share with you all, I work in the field 2 hours a week, and by the time they make it to my little community center in Baltimore City, and they have a cutoff notice, we're in the foxhole, and for the last year I've been asking everybody, have you applied for SNAP? So they're with me, we're going through again the whole process for OHEP, and 95% of the time they say, yeah, I'm on SNAP, and I'm thinking, oh, this is just a brilliant bill. So us too, me too, thumbs up.
Hello, good day. My name is Marilyn Brooks. Hello, good day, everyone. My name is Marilyn Brooks. I live in Hyattsville, Maryland, and I'm representing the food bank. I'm a CLC member, and I'm pledging to see if we can get the application combined with people that is applying for the SNAP program. You have one opportunity to get your SNAP. If you get the SNAP, then you automatically qualify for the utility assistance. So making it easy, especially for the elderly, not to have to fill out 2 or 3 applications for the programs, the different programs that they qualify for. That's what I have to say.
Thank you so much. We have one virtual. It's Cindy Carter. Do you want to let her in? Ms.
Good
Carter.
afternoon, Cindy Carter. Good afternoon, Chairman Crosby and committee. Cindy Carter, I'm a co-founder of the Critical Medical Needs Program. I'm also the executive director of Cancer Support Foundation. And I also echo what everyone else is saying. And yes, we deal for last 18 years, the most vulnerable population in the state. And we find that a lot of them are able to get into the SNAP, but they just are not able to get into any of the other systems. If with this bill, that means these people would also be able to get into the energy assistance, and that's what our major focus is, trying to keep their lights and the heat on. But most of the time, once they're even in SNAP, they're not in other programs, they're not able to get in other programs, they're not even referred to energy assistance. So we find that our clients are just not able to manage the various things. This bill is brilliant because it says, okay, one time you get in and show that you are eligible for these programs, and we can then get to the help to keep the lights and the heat and the refrigerator going so that all the food that you can get and the medicine that you have to take is then protected. So I'm here in favor of HB 323 and are asking for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, that concludes this bill hearing. Next, we'll go to Delegate Charkoudian again for House Bill 61.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I call up my panel? May I? Thank you. Great. Thank you. I'm still Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, and now I'm asking for a favorable report on House Bill 61. This bill, you heard earlier about the bill that establishes prevailing wage for underground utilities and the adjustment to make that enforceable. This bill just sort of expands that so we have uniformity with overground and underground utilities. So this bill requires prevailing wage for the electric distribution system. So I think what we know is coming is there's going to be a great deal of electrification over the next several years. We're going to have electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation, and we're also going to need to do major investments in the electric grid to prepare in terms of resiliency and in terms of increased renewable, distributed renewable energy. So when we can see that there is a major economic shift coming, what we tend to do in this state is really make sure that we're putting everything in place so that that economic shift or that investment in infrastructure that we see on the horizon is really going to result in the kind of policy goals that we have. And so this is really our opportunity to say major investments are coming to our grid. How can we make sure that we are leveraging those investments for the economy that we need, for the worker training that we need, for the safety and stability that we need? So we know that requiring prevailing wages will increase the income for local workers. It'll increase the amount of local workers as opposed to out-of-state workers who are working on these projects, and it'll increase the local multiplier effect, and so it's beneficial to small businesses and to the broader local economy. We also know from a range of research over many years that prevailing wage leads to increased worker productivity and efficiency and fewer cost overruns on projects. This bill also requires apprenticeships, and so essentially by including those apprenticeships in there, all of these investments in the grid is going to address some of our workforce development goals that we have as a state. And finally, when we are paying prevailing wages, we actually, just to flip back to the earlier bill, we end up decreasing the burden on the safety net services of the state. When we have workers who can feed their families and live middle-class lives, then we have fewer people who are dependent on the state's safety net services. And so the last thing I wanted to mention is that prevailing wages tend to decrease the likelihood that contractors will misclassify workers. And so we tend to see more the taxes paid into state and local government. So as I said, we've done this already. We've made this decision that the underground utility work is an important infrastructure component that's worthy of having these prevailing wage establishments. And this is an opportunity to create the parity for the electric grid above ground as well. And I'd like to pass it to my panel members. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Aziz. I'm Chief Steward of IBW Local 410. I'm also an 18-year employee of Baltimore Gas and Electric. My trade is relay and control tech. IBW Local 410 represents the 1,400 plus members that work in the field at BG&E. And with the wave of infrastructure dollars that are coming our way, it is important to us and our members that these contractors serve an apprenticeship and are qualified workers to do the work like we do when we take on capital work in-house. Also, paying the prevailing wage will get you a better caliber of worker, and it also shows a commitment from the contractors to their workers that they're willing to pay higher wages for better work, and that really impacts the safety of our members. A lot of these fly-by-night style contractors will come in with maybe one or two qualified persons on the job, and you'll have an anthill of unqualified workers working around your system doing capital improvements. And what happens in those situations is the work quality is shoddy, and they have to build it once, but we have to maintain it forever or for its life. So when we're maintaining things that are built with shoddiness, we end up finding it puts our members in danger of inadvertent blow-ups or electrical shorts, and it also can cause our members to have time away from their families when their systems that they install fail, and we have to answer the call-outs when they come in. So with that, IBW Local 410 is urging a favorable report on HB 61. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm Jeffrey Guido. I'm here on behalf of the Baltimore DC Metro Building Trades Council. We support House Bill 61 as it pertains to the apprenticeship training. Your wages increase as your skill levels increase. You're afforded health care benefits and retirement benefits. And former Congressman Roy Dellums, and as he was a mayor of Oakland, California, did a study. And the study was titled The Way Out. And what he was trying to address was the generational welfare that was taking place in the inner city, and was really a lack of opportunity that caused it. And in this bill, where it reaches out to the underserved, the minorities, women, veterans, returning citizens, is going to provide them with that opportunity and create a path to the middle class so they can pursue the American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had this similar question on a prior bill
Yep.
related to utilities, so I'll just ask and restate the same question as concisely as I can.
The same answer is true.
Okay, all right. Well, so just for the record, you've got utility work. This
Yep.
applies just to utility work. If you've got a private developer building a private building, and within that building is a structure that you put these utilities in, this doesn't apply.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions, that concludes this bill hearing. The last bill is mine. It's House Bill 692. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, Delegate Brian Crosby here to present House Bill 692, Public Service Commission Certificates of Public Convenience and Necessity, Local Permits. The bill is straightforward and pretty simple. It just requires that local governments process any local permits required to construct a generating station or qualified generator lead line under a certificate of public convenience and necessity within a reasonable time. I'll give you the couple situations on why the bill is being brought forward. Essentially, we go through the CPCN process, and the PSC orders or approves the project within the CPCN process. And then at the tail end, after the project is approved, it goes back to the local jurisdiction, who may not necessarily be in favor of that project. And then they basically say, well, we don't have a site permitting process in place for pick whatever, so we can't do the project as a whole. And the PSC can't then turn around, because they don't have the authority, to issue or approve or mandate that local jurisdiction take whatever local permitting process is required to complete the project. And so there's this standoff, and this bill is the fix without going to court. You know, I think that the example that has been given about affordable housing. So if the state were to say we want to build affordable housing in, you know, in X location, everything, you know, the local jurisdiction has input to it. The developer has input. We approve that project. And then at the very end, the local jurisdiction says, well, we're not going to approve the driveway to get to the local affordable housing complex. And that is essentially what this is equivalent to. I'll let my panel go, and then we can take questions. And I urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Cyrus Tashikori on behalf of MAREC Action. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. This is a straightforward bill. As you all well know, in-state utility scale solar is going to play a big part in meeting the state's climate goals by 2030. And thanks in part to work that this committee's done over the last few years, we're finally at a place where we've addressed CPCN delays and solar projects can start and finish the CPCN process in a reasonable amount of time. So why is this bill necessary? As the Public Service Commission said in their written testimony, there are some local governments that are arguing that essentially despite state preemption and the robust CPCN process, that solar projects have to go all the way through the local zoning process or go to court to have these types of non-discretionary permits like stormwater permits, driveway permits, site plan reviews process. So this argument would really essentially nullify the Public Service Commission's citing authority, and this bill explicitly gives local governments the authority to process those technical and non-discretionary permits. These are only permits that come out of the CPCN. You may hear that this bill creates new work or complications for local governments. We don't believe that's true. I'll give you 3 facts to remember when you do hear those arguments. 1, things like stormwater permits, site plan review, driveway permits would have to occur even if you go through the local process. 2, while these projects are critical to meeting the state's climate goals, there are only very few of them each year. We're talking single-digit number of projects per year across the state. And finally, some local governments have actually processed these types of permits on CPCN projects in the past until this kind of new legal, novel legal argument has emerged. So with that, I thank you, and we'll pass the mic to David here.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is David Bugelmans. I'm a lawyer from the law firm Gordon Feinblatt, appearing today also on behalf of MAREC Action. As a lawyer, I've handled the CPCNs for more than 35 solar projects across all regions of the state. HB 692 is a very technical bill, but it's also very important. Right now, we have a situation where the Public Service Commission, after year-long reviews in some cases, has approved CPCNs for solar facilities. The counties have indicated that even though there's a CPCN, they don't have the authority to issue the basic development permits needed to build those projects. This legislation fixes that regulatory gap by providing that authority. I would like to take a moment to address some criticisms that you may hear today or in written testimony. First, this bill does not change the PSC's authority in any way. The Maryland Supreme Court in 2019 clarified that authority. This bill doesn't change that decision. Second, this bill does not limit local authority or fast-track development. In fact, this bill clarifies that local governments have the authority to review these development permits, which some have indicated they do not believe they currently have. Third, county laws and standards are a significant part of the CPCN process, and this bill does not change that fact. In fact, county input is so important that for every CPCN I've worked on, there are conditions to that permit requiring compliance with all county design standards, including setbacks and screening. And fourth, local governments are best situated to conduct these reviews. As Mr. Tashikori said, they conduct these reviews for all other kinds of development. They have the engineering staff, the staff in place to do this and apply standards to those plans. You have written testimony in front of you from the Office of People's Counsel and MEA, two agencies deeply involved in these issues, supporting this bill, saying it's necessary. You also have a letter from the Public Service Commission, a respected and neutral regulator, also saying this is a real issue and that this legislation would solve it. So this is an important bill. It's critically important. We urge a favorable report and look forward to answering your questions.
Lisa, are you just informational?
Okay,
or-
I'll be very brief, Madam Chair. Lisa Smith, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Public Service Commission. I think most of my points were already addressed, but I would just add that the commission does agree that this is an issue that will certainly reoccur absent legislative action and could delay the development of renewable generation in the state. And we think that a legislative solution would present an appropriate alternative to time-consuming litigation for everyone. And yes, I'm here for any questions. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for this panel? Delegate Adams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm going to be very thoughtful, and I'm going to try very hard to stay on the bill. The question that I'm going to have for you is that when you say you're representing the developers, so I'm speaking to the developers or the council, the CPCN process, while important, I worry quite often does not announce the project properly, does not give the public the heads up that this is happening. And so what quite often happens is these projects get 2 or 3, maybe 10 steps down the road, and then the local commissioners, zoning authorities then realize that what just happened during the CPCN actually should not have happened, and or they should have been more present and available. My experience on the Eastern Shore, if I close with my question, is that we are subject to, over the handful of years, as we have had a few solar bills here, subject to a proliferation of solar projects on farmland. And I'm of the position that if you're a private landowner and you want to sell your land to a developer and they're going to pay you X amount of dollars, that you as a private developer should have the right to do that within the context of the counties being able to assert their planning, their comprehensive plan, but also that there's fair play in the marketplace when it comes to what adjacent landowners are going to think, what's going to happen in a public setting like a CPCN, and whether the commissioners and the elected officials in each of these counties feel like they're being made whole during the process. If that is possible, then the bill is not necessary. But my question is, why are you here for the bill, but for the fact that the CPCN process misses probably on a regular basis the real challenge that we face, which is citizen constituent input doesn't show up during that hearing?
Delegate, I would just say a couple things. First, it doesn't change the CPCN process. So that is one. Two, notification to the counties is required under the CPCN process, and there are 2 public comment hearings during every process. So that is all still part of this. This is after the order is issued, simply making compliance with what is found in that order. That's it.
My question wasn't answered in that what are we going to do with the CPCN process to fix the problem that you're trying to solve, which is once this becomes an issue and that the commissioners who are elected officials are now having to assert, and then their zoning authorities assert some discretion when they realize a project is coming forward. And some of these projects, by the way, these aren't like 20 or 30 counter projects. These are taking hundreds of acres of land from the Eastern Shore. You know, from, I'm going to stay off my soapbox and stay on the bill. I'd like to be able to say, if we're going to pass a bill like this, that we strengthen the public notice requirements during CPCN, that we work very hard to, if we're going to have the meetings, mail constituents, email constituents, call constituents, put it in the newspaper. Here's what's coming. Here's how big it is. Here's how dramatic the interconnections are going to have to be. Would you accept those sort of amendments on this bill?
Delegate, I think that A, is a different bill, but B, there is strong public notification requirements. You have to, first off, the county is served. Secondly, there is notice to the best of anybody's ability to put it in a newspaper to make sure the locals have some sort of awareness or input in it. So this doesn't really address that. This is after the process is over, simply not getting a result, maybe one community or two communities want, then coming back and saying, we can't apply, we can't execute the CPCN process simply because we have this other local permitting process that we didn't make aware during the entire CPCN process. But that community, every local county has the opportunity, mine included, to provide input throughout the process, as well as the public. Sorry.
So Mr. Vice Chairman, I don't doubt the sincerity of the bill and why it's here. What I'm saying is that you're trying to solve a symptom of a bigger problem. Thank you.
Delegate Ahrens.
Just real briefly, this sounds to me like, and I think I understand a lot of what he was saying, but this sounds to me like that my county, should we not want this type of development in our county, that this supersedes what my county may or may, the will of the commission, the will of the people of the county, because it's insisting that the PSC demand they fill something out to allow this to move forward. Is that correct?
Yeah, take it.
Thank you for that question, Delegate. The commission would not have authority to mandate whether the local permits are approved or denied. I think this is simply trying to ensure efficiency, that decisions are made, that we don't have this regulatory gap.
It says here, notwithstanding any local law or a county or municipality corporation shall process within a reasonable amount of time.
Correct. Shall process. It doesn't say shall approve or deny.
Okay. I think I misunderstand. It sounds to me like you're really removing part of the county, and one of the things we like to do is we get criticized continuously for looking like, let's say, like Glen Burnie. I get that told by Ken Island all the time. And we try to control that on my side of the bridge somewhat. But this is sounding to me like you're able to sit back and say, I appreciate that you guys all think you need this, but we have a goal we've set for ourselves, and we need to achieve it. Therefore, you're going to have to fill this out because we're going to make a determination. And in the end, we don't have a real control or say over that zoning and that use, if you will.
The CPN, as was mentioned, the CPCN conditions do require the developers to obtain the local permits. And respectfully, Delegate, I didn't read in the bill. We probably wouldn't have supported language that said must approve or deny, because that is local jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for this panelist? Seeing none, we have one more favorable of virtual, Mr. Mark Posner.
Yes,
Whenever
thank
you're ready.
you. Yes, Mark Posner, testifying on behalf of the Maryland Sierra Club, on behalf of our thousands of members and supporters in the state. The Maryland Sierra Club is a very strong supporter of solar energy in the state. That includes the larger projects that require PSC approval, as well as community solar projects and rooftop solar. All three are important parts of the state's solar strategy. So with regard to projects that require CPCN through the PSC, it is of course important that they be reviewed promptly in a reasonably prompt manner and through a process that is clear and is well organized. So as discussed in the prior testimony, this bill simply wants to make sure that there is not a missing link or an ambiguous link in this process once the CPCN is granted. The CPCN, as a result of input during the process from local jurisdictions, which among other things can intervene in the PSC proceeding, that the CPCN then lists the roster of local permits that need to be obtained. So it is important then, as part of this well-organized process that the General Assembly has reviewed several times over recent years, that that local jurisdictions then proceed in a reasonably prompt manner. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the favorable. We'll now go to the unfavorable, and the only person here to oppose my bill, Michael Sanderson. Dun, 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 dun. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Why, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the framing and the welcome. Thanks so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'm Michael Sanderson, the Director of the Maryland Association of Counties. Heard context about this bill. I know for the most part today is yet another energy and utility day, but oddly enough, you get a zoning bill, because effectively that's what this bill is a zoning bill. So I want to speak to that a little bit. I don't think that our opposition is as far apart from where the sponsor and supporters from the case that they just made as may have met the eye, and some of that might lie in the exact phrasing of the bill. So let me speak to that, if I may. First of all, this matter of who controls the zoning for these facilities, that issue is almost completely settled. The Maryland courts have already said through a relatively recent case, reaffirmed that once you get your certificate from the PSC, you have the right to build the facility. The locals don't get to step in and say this isn't inconsistent with our comprehensive plan or local zoning. We lost that fight. Touchdown's already scored on the board. Now we're just talking about like the celebration dance afterward. Really, what's now at stake is the implementation phase. If you have local governments that are trying to use this permitting process that the bill speaks to as a way to sort of backdoor say, no, we don't want the project, then you probably need some sort of a bill. What I heard just a moment ago was jurisdictions say they're not sure they have the authority to proceed with those projects or those permits. And if so, you might need a bill, but you don't need a bill as big and aggressive as this one. Because our reading of this bill, when this bill says you shall process all the related local permits, that reads to our folks in local government like, forget whatever your standards are for the Forest Conservation Act or for stormwater management or any number of setbacks, other conditions that are routine in facility placement once they've been approved. Set all that stuff aside and process, meaning approve, all those permits immediately. If the bill says stand down on everything, we're going to have to rubber stamp a bunch of permits where there's no actual compliance with the content of the permit. I'm not sure that's what you meant, but we believe that that's what the bill says. There may be some room in the middle if that's the case.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with you on this, and I'll still listen to the podcast this week. So, but seeing no other questions, I appreciate you coming in. That concludes this bill hearing and the bill hearings for today. I want to thank everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you all. If this turns into any sort of something along those lines, I mean, I think there's plenty of opportunity to get Bill on that. So this is how to reach me, if that's helpful.
Got my last card.
All good.
We were becoming language, but I'm sure it could be specified. We don't think it's clear. The last thing we want is arguing at the commission about the